The four panelists that I've invited here today, I admire these men because they all represent positive examples of fatherhood, leadership, and also perseverance. I'm gonna let them tell their own stories, but I'd like to start inviting them up to the stage.
All right, guys, so we're gonna start out with a similar activity from the film. Just tell us who you are and where you come from.
So, my name is Cameron Rollins. I come from Southeast Washington, D.C. And I come from a community of love, of, in some cases, like trauma, but I come from a community of love also.
Hi everybody, my name is Kofi Essel. I'm a community pediatrician by training. I come from Little Rock, Arkansas. Anybody from Arkansas in the room? I see you in the back. Nobody in the back. So yeah, I come from Little Rock, Arkansas. I grew up in Little Rock. Actually, my family's from Ghana, West Africa. I was actually born in London. Came to Arkansas when I was 4. So I grew up there, and yeah, I've been in DC since about 2006, and enjoyed it ever since.
My name is Daniel Cohn. I come from Chicago, Illinois. I come from a family of strong, outspoken men who are very much so involved in the community. I come from praying grandmothers that if it wasn't for them, I probably wouldn't be here today. Who I am an engineer, I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm an uncle. I am all of these different roles in the same community, so I'm just trying to live it through.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jordan Jefferson. I'm from Jackson, Mississippi, so I'm a Southern boy. Where I come from, the part of the country has been neglected from state and local municipalities, from misinformation or just simply neglect. I am a person, I work on Capitol Hill and want to see America do better on a grassroots approach because where I'm from has been neglected and we want to see it get better. So I want to make this thing work for us instead of work for everybody else. So that's what I'm passionate about and that's what I fight for.
So our first question, during childhood, what was your relationship like with your father? And Dan, you can start.
All right, so my relationship with my father is complicated to say the least. He was there every single day of my life. I'm the one child that he raised from start to finish. I have an older brother and sister from his first marriage, but he didn't raise them. I have a younger brother who grew up in the same household as me, but my dad would tell you he didn't raise him either. I am the product of everything that he put into me. Now with that said, my relationship with him, he wanted me to be things that he felt was important. So strength was one thing. He wanted me to be strong. He didn't want the world to take advantage of me. And his way of instilling that in me wasn't the healthiest. It led to a lot of, let's say, toxic masculinity. And it took therapy to kind of deprogram that. So although he was there and he had the best of intentions, the approach and the way that it was done wasn't as effective as it could have been. Fundamentally, I've taken a lot from my dad, but there's other things that I just like form my own. So yeah, it's complicated.
The relationship I have with my father is not good at all. I came from a 2-parent household, but my dad was physically there, but that was about it. My dad was a college football coach, so the first half of my childhood he was not around. And I kind of had I was living my life at that point for wars. I wanted him to participate in more of what I wanted to be in, but it just wasn't clicking. I really don't even speak to my father like that at all, except to pay my phone bill once a month. So I've tried to build a relationship, but I'm not a person. I can't be around long and be quiet. I don't like the way his leadership has been through how he's treated my mother, or how he's guided as a man, or lack of providership. So I just don't agree with it, so I don't believe in staying around that. So what I do is when I have relationships or will have a family, I've taken the notes down of what I've seen in the neglect, and I'm going to be a better father and a better partner for my lady. So that's the positivity I'm going to take for my negativity.
Very nice.
I can go next. So I didn't grow up with my father. I grew up in a home with my mother, my grandmother, brother, and other extended family, but never got a chance to grow up with my father. When I was older, 8th, 9th grade, I used to go and visit him. He lived in a different state, and I would go and sometimes spend the summer with him and his kids, and got a chance to get to know him here and there. I always felt disconnected. But I guess the truth was, growing up, I didn't know what I wasn't missing because I didn't have it. And I guess seeing some of my friends and, you know, seeing some of their fathers, and sometimes, you know, they were connected, but a lot of times those fathers were disconnected too. And so I didn't ever feel that I was missing anything because I didn't know what I was missing at the time. I think my mother sort of always took on the role of trying to go over and beyond to try to provide this other side, thinking this, you know, the stereotypical side, right? Like, I need to be more macho, I need to be, you know, raise tough boys, and these aspects. And so that was a big, big thing that I noticed in the home, but no, I did not get a chance to grow up with my father.
I think the relationship with my father is kind of mixed. Like, I think growing up, there were times in which he was like incarcerated. So in times where he wasn't incarcerated, but he wasn't necessarily active either. But as an adult, I think the relationship is a lot stronger than it once was. And I think he's a much better father to like adult men, because I think you just need something different as an adult. And understanding, like, for instance, he grew up without his mother. My mother grew up without her father. So it's like understanding like how generational trauma can impact the way in which we're raised.
So for you guys who didn't have your father present in your life on a daily basis, like, were there any other Black men in your life that provided mentorship? And if not, then how do you think it would have made a difference?
Other Black men in my life. So for me, I got really into sports at a young age, and sports became sort of that outlet for me. So my coaches were Black men, and so I really gravitated towards coaches and really respected and listened to them, and was, you know, I grew up kind of with this perfectionist mentality anyway. So I'm working on my craft all the time with the guidance of these coaches that served this role that I felt at the time that what a father role would feel like, right? This consistency, this reliability, this respect that was there. So that was where that sort of relationship came from. I had uncles in the area, and not really blood uncles, but, you know, we would just call them uncles. So there was a little bit of that aspect as well. But I would say the coach aspect was probably the closest thing for me. And sorry, you said if I had that, how would that have changed things? I don't know, like, I think it would have opened up a lot of other aspects. The consistency in a home experience, because I didn't realize the range of emotions that me as a man or a boy should have, I think it would have allowed me to really be able to experience that at a younger age, instead of trying to learn that at an older age. I didn't know I didn't know how to cry. I didn't know what crying was. I didn't know how to express these emotions because I didn't see men expressing them. What I would see is my example on TV. I'm wrestling. I was watching wrestling and sports, you know, and it's this very rigid, like, you know, you didn't get any range, right? So I just try to mimic what I saw, and I thought that was what we were supposed to do.
Did you go to therapy in your adult life to learn how to express emotions in a healthy way?
I did not go to therapy in terms of like a formal therapist, but I felt like I went through the therapy of life and seeing the range of emotions of other people and seeing that, hey, my life doesn't have to look exactly like this. And so I just had to sort of, I guess, I don't know, it was just sort of a time thing. It's like the medicine of time and being around other people and learning that, hey, I can express myself in other ways. I'm grateful for my wife. I'm married. I have 2 children. Who has stood with me through thick and thin, and when I am more immature in my emotional responses to things, like silence and not knowing how to express things, has been with me to sort of help me to figure out how to communicate better, right? Like, these are things that I've learned through the journey, and I have a lot to learn, but I'm grateful for that opportunity to get to learn new things each and every day.
Mine similar came from football from elementary. I played college football as well, where kind of like your college coaches are your dad away from home regarding grades and all that type of stuff. I would say throughout the process of football, it's been really good mentorship for me because that literally is your dad because you're around them year round. I would say if my dad, in my opinion, did what he needed to do, I don't think I would be as ambitious as I am because I think I would have got kind of like plateaued because of the stability. I think me as a person, my personality, I think being like stability mindset is worse than being last. So I think that would not make me to fight for what I want to do now. And also I feel like the best leaders are the most broken people. I think I've seen that through my matriculation through life. I've seen that it's just dealing with adversity, battle wounds is, it makes you closer to the common man than the people from the elites. And I think people now, more than ever, sniff that now because how small the world is through the internet.
Growing up, when I got married, I remember, we were gonna have a child, and I was like, man, I do not want a daughter. And I'm sorry to say this, but I was scared of the experience of having a daughter. I didn't know what that meant to raise a girl either, and I was like, man, it's gotta be a boy, it's gotta be a son. I know what it means to raise a boy. I've never done it, but in my head, I knew what it meant. And I remember when I saw this little girl that came out, she was the first one. God, it's interesting what he did to me, but it broke me down. The emotional opportunity it gave me to connect with this girl and how she broke me down in a way that I never could have imagined. She was what I needed at a time, and it opened up a whole new aspect for my life, and I'm so grateful for that as well. So again, I do feel like there's snapshots in life that we have, but there's so much opportunity, and giving us a chance to have that is so great.
I want to go back to what Jordan said, where he said he wouldn't have been as ambitious if his dad had done what he was supposed to do. Do you feel like your ambition is a way for you to get his attention?
Yes, that's what it was at first. So I used to live my life for rewards and goals to prove, right? And that's, when you do that, you get to those points of what you prayed for, and you're not prepared for what you prayed for because your intentions are wrong. So I had to be intentional about how I address the world. And from that, I feel like I got healing from that trauma because my intentions were wrong.
Kofi, do you think that if you had seen your dad love your mom, you would have been more prepared to have a daughter?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I think it would have been an amazing thing to be able to see, because I do believe a lot of our learning is more caught than taught. We can talk about how much we teach children and the things we say to them and the lessons we give them, but the lived experience of being shoulder to shoulder with people and seeing the day-to-day experiences, the ups and the downs, I think teaches us so much. Those stories mean so much. So yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm sure that would have gave me an opportunity to see, hey, love can look a variety of ways. It doesn't just have to look like this, So I'm sure it would have.
Yeah. Cameron, did you want to?
To be honest, this is an interesting question, and even like hearing some of the brothers' thoughts as well. It's because I do agree in some levels. Like adversity is like really important to like I think gaining like some level of endurance. But I don't know how my outcomes would have been if I had an active father. To be honest, it's like I know, like for instance, when I attended Morris College, that was the first time I really experienced like mentorship by other like black men. And it was insurmountable the amount of time, that short amount of time, the amount that I grew, right? And like I even have some friends in the crowd, like where I was at like freshman year of high school to where I was even at freshman year of Morales, it's like night and day. So if that could happen in that short amount of time by having positive black male role models, so I could only imagine what would have happened if I had from 0 to 18, right? Like a positive black male role model in my home, I think just insurmountable, right? And I think sometimes like adversity, life will give you adversity anyway, right? Like I don't know if we have to experience it from like the absence of a father.
Dan, did you have something?
I do want to say something because I think my perspective is different. Growing up with my father and him being there, he placed a glass ceiling over, or at least he attempted to put a glass ceiling over what I was able to grow into and do. I couldn't outgrow him. I couldn't have more information than him. And I don't think it was intentional. I think it was just like the timing of like when I was coming up, because I came up in the a child is to be seen and not heard era, which if you were born in the 80s in a black household, you came up in the same way. And with that, I also came in the age of the internet. And I remember I would say certain things that my father had taught me to my friends, and they would like laugh. And I was like embarrassed. So I learned how to get on Google and ask Jeeves and Yahoo and find my own information. And when he would give me information, I would cross-reference it and try to challenge him. And so for me, that growth came from his brothers, oddly enough. They would even say like, yeah, don't listen to your father with certain things, but they would empower me with more information as well. So through them, I learned how critical mentors are, and it's the mentorship that kind of evolved me here, not so much my father being in the household on a day-to-day basis.
So when you're Googling and you're finding things on the internet and you bring it back to your dad to challenge him, did he feel like that was disrespect? And how did you guys navigate that?
Ultimate disrespect. I had a nickel for every time he called me disrespectful because of his misinformation. And he didn't grow up in that same era where he can go to a computer and type a question and get an answer. So all of his information has been fed to him, and he's chosen to accept what information he's accepted, and that's like molded his view. But I didn't want those things to mold my view, so I went out into the world to get more information, and when I would bring it back to him thinking he'll be proud of me, it was, no, you're being disrespectful because you can't tell me I'm wrong. You're a child and I'm an adult.
Did that stifle your self-confidence?
Yes, it stifled my self-confidence in my home, but in the world, no, not so much.
So that kind of goes into our next question, speaking of fathers of the 80s and 90s, and I'm speaking partly from my own experience too. They were praised, celebrated, applauded if they simply provided for the family or they lived in the house with the family. But I think we underestimate as the Black community the impact of having an emotionally unavailable or absent father in the home. And so I want to know from the panelists, is it more important to have a dad in the house every day or to have a dad who invests in the emotional connection whenever he can visit? And Dan, you can start with, yeah.
So I struggle with the guilt because my son doesn't live with me. My son's 16 years old. He lives in Chicago with his mom. I live in Dallas, Texas. I also have a 4-year-old daughter who lives in Dallas. The original plan when I moved to Texas was for my son to move with me. In 2019 is when I moved. Of course, we all know what happened in 2020 is the pandemic, the world shut down. He came down and stayed for a little while, but he wasn't able to build those connections, and so he wanted to go back with his mom. For me, I grew up with my dad being there every day, and it's taken years of therapy to kind of unlearn some of those things that were instilled in me. So I don't feel like being there every single day is effective as much as the conversations and the information and the dialogue, because I'm still able to teach my son from afar because we have these devices that can bring him into the room right now if we wanted him a part of this conversation. So we don't have the struggles of not being able to communicate. We can communicate all the time. When I read books, I give him the books to read and we dialogue about it. So you don't have to physically be there to be felt.
Nice. I love how you put that. Yeah. Anybody else?
I think it's a good question. You know, so I'm thinking of this thing through like that sort of that lived experience, that long journey. And I know that there are points in time where a father may be emotionally unavailable and unable to connect, and a lot of that may, trace back to their own trauma, their own experiences. When I started, my father passed away a few years ago, but when he passed away, going to the funeral, I started hearing all these stories and started learning about his background, where he came from, his experiences. I was like, oh shoot, he had incredible trauma, and I never knew any of this. It makes sense why he was emotionally unavailable. It makes sense how he wasn't able to connect with his children. It makes sense how he was a workaholic. It makes sense how I do the same things that he did, and I wasn't even raised by him, right? So I think the interesting thing for me is also the grace of going through a journey with people. There are moments in time where people are in a stage of learning. They're in a stage of wherever they are, and they're going to be emotionally unavailable, but people grow, people change. I would imagine, again, I didn't grow up with my father, I would imagine it would have been a better experience to be able to see those ups and the downs, again, to see that range, to feel those good times. There would have been bad times too, but to have those good moments as well, I could imagine that would have been great to have. But again, this is a dream, right? Never know what that would actually be like.
So without that experience, how do you manage to cultivate an emotional relationship with your children?
Yeah. I think a lot of us, we look at the pictures of our experiences growing up and we say, how do we overcompensate? Sometimes we probably go overboard a little too much, maybe sometimes in an unhealthy way. And I think that's it. Took a picture in my mind of the things that I didn't have as I've gotten older and realized these are the things that I need to make sure to provide and prioritize. I'm probably missing other things, and these children will get up and say, you didn't do X, Y, and Z. I get it. The goal is not perfection. I cannot be a perfect father. It is not my role to be a perfect father. In fact, I believe strongly in my faith that they have a perfect father who I can point them to, that I've learned from myself. So as a result, I don't have to be that. I can't be that. I can't be everything to all of them. But I can do the best that I can. With the love that I've received from my Father in heaven, I'm able to then extend that love to them. So that's the way I look at it. Now, when I look at that, I realize, how can I help them be emotionally available? I can show them the range of emotions myself. I can show them when things are good and bad. If I mess up, I can go back to them and apologize. Nobody ever apologized to me as a child. In the 80s, 90s, what? Everybody apologizing. No, parent is never wrong, right? Never wrong. My mama never been wrong. Don't tell her that. Take that out to record. But the reality is the ability to then come back to them, apologize. Let them see me apologize to my wife. Let them see me talk to my mom in a way that's respectful. That stuff passes on, right? Again, a lot of this is more caught than taught. I can talk to them till their face turns blue, if I say that right. But it doesn't mean they're learning from that. And I think that's an important thing to grab.
Do you cry in front of your kids?
Do I cry for my kids? So I can't say that I'm still a crier. I never learned how to cry, but at the same time, I have cried. Or those are allergies? No, I'm kidding. I have cried, and now the crying has come as a result of this deep emotional connection with these kids. And it has broken me. I mean, there was a time that I remember being sick in my bed, couldn't get out of my bed, couldn't get anywhere. And I remember my daughter came over to me and just prayed for me. And it broke me down. It broke me down. And the care and the love she had for me. And I was just like, God, do I deserve this? Like, who is this? And so those kind of moments, I've had tears. And she's seen that. But it's not a daily thing. It's not a monthly thing. Probably not even a yearly thing. Once a decade. No, I'm kidding. And again, there's nothing wrong with crying. But it just hasn't been my experience. I don't know how to enter that emotion if it's not there.
I really want to explore. You said, do I deserve this? Why do you feel like you don't deserve the depth of love that your daughter offers you?
I think it's just, I don't know. It's just, it is an insurmountable, incredible love. And it's like, do I deserve this from a human being to be able to provide this for me when I have not been perfect? I have not shown an immense love to the world in the way that I would love to. Honestly, it's a place of humility more than anything else. And so I don't know if I don't know if I'm communicating it well enough. It is a place of like a humility that I'm able to step into and appreciate that, man, God, you love me this much that you're showing me this love in a variety of ways. This is one of the ways you're showing it to me. And so that is that humility that I'm grasping.
I see. Cameron, did you have something to say?
Yeah, so recently, and I go back to it often, it's a conversation with James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni. It's like, I do it maybe like 3 times a year. And in it, the specific part of it, because in the beginning, like she has immense respect for him. They have immense respect for one another, and you can see in the conversation. But it's one part in the conversation where they're like struggling a bit. And James Baldwin, he's actually like, he was her father's generation. And Nikki Giovanni at the time, she might be early 30s. But they were talking about like the condition of the black community, but specifically what that looks like in the household, and how some of the sufferings that black men had to experience during the time came back, and it was reflected within the way black men commonly would engage with black women. And she was struggling with him, and in the sense she was like pretty much explaining to him that like, we need love too, right? And we're not meant to suffer in this way. So is this quote that I think stood out. She said, "Because I love you, I get the least of you." And even as it relates to, so it feeds back to your question, like how would it be if I had an active father that may not, well, if I had a father in home that may not be the most active or may not be the most healthy, right? I think, I don't know, I think it could create like a cyclical effect of the way that I view manhood even. To be honest, growing up with like a mother, though she had like life's experiences as well that impacted the way in which she raised us, like we knew love. And I think that's really important. It impacted the way I view black women, like the way I engage with black women. And I don't know if I had a father in the household that didn't engage with my black mother in a way that was respectful, in a way that was loving. I don't know how that would have impacted me. So I'm not sure. So
I do want to bring up like a point, if you would. It's great that we're having this conversation, and I always think when I do dialogues like this with like my brothers or like my cousins, I'm like, yo, do you think our parents had these types of conversations? And they like, nah. And if you look at like why, I have done a lot of research, if you would, just trying to understand like the why. If like, why is it like this? And it's no fault to us. And for a long time, I blamed my dad. I'm like, this is his fault. Like, you should have done better as a man. And I would, in my adulthood, chastise him for his approach. Like again, it took years of therapy for me to get to a space where it's just like, I can forgive you for your shortcomings. And it kind of ties back to that receiving love. My dad didn't know how to receive love. He wasn't really given that. He came from a 2-parent household as well. His dad was an alcoholic who just went to work and came home. When he came home, he would get his food, and you can't talk to dad. And he had a family around the corner that everybody knew, but nobody said anything because we don't want to piss grandma off. But we praised and exalted him as if he was perfect, but he was not like perfect. But again, we go back a little bit further, and before his generation, that's literally like we're knocking on slavery again, and we're knocking on these broken households and this disjointedness. And so now slavery ends, we're out in the world, but we don't know how to be a family. My dad didn't have the opportunity to learn from his dad how to just hug and kiss his children. My grandmother, one thing that stood out in this movie, every time I would see her, she would start with negative, every single time. And I hated her for it. But she was trying to criticize me so that when I went out into the world, I couldn't get criticized. And later I had to appreciate that. But it's a systemic thing, and it comes from the brokenness of slavery in the family in our institution. So if we look at it from that systemic standpoint, it's like, okay, what do? We gotta have this conversation. And we have to have it with our kids around. And they have to be a part of that conversation as well too. Because I've learned the most from my son, not from anybody else. Like, I've had to apologize to him. I remember I gave him a whooping one time because he peed in the bed. He's 5. And I was like, now you know, we have this conversation. He's trying to explain it to me, and I'm just like, nah, I'm not listening. Kids are to be seen, not heard. Give him a whooping, we clean it up. The next morning I wake up. He's sitting on the bed Indian style waiting for me to wake up. And he was like, I just want to tell you that you were wrong for whooping me last night. Kids in the 80s, if we tried that, we're getting kicked through the door, like chest kicked in the door, like you're out. But when I heard that, I felt small. I was like, yo, I didn't even give him a chance to express himself. And so I learned then, like, okay, we have to be able to receive from our kids as well as give to them. But I don't think my dad had that opportunity.
You know, I think as a community, we place a lot of responsibility and blame on the Black mother. But I think it starts with the Black father, right? And if we don't raise our boys to be emotionally available and supportive and able to show and demonstrate love, then the whole family crumbles, right? Because the mother is overwhelmed, she's not feeling respected and loved, and then the children don't see an example. We've kind of already touched on this, but in our society, boys are not encouraged to openly express emotions that may be perceived as weakness. How were you taught to manage your difficult emotions such as sadness, fear, and shame, and how they manifest?
From like through my adulthood or childhood, teenage years, I would say my dad taught me to like just hold it within. If you express yourself, the man in charge of your job will look at you as not a man. And it's just like, I get his perspective, but in present day, is that right? I don't think so. But I think when you say certain things to people, they overcompensate other things, and it creates another problem, a ripple effect. So I would say you gotta be careful with how you talk to your children, because that has a whole nother effect on the future. So I would say that was my perspective. I'm a tough kid, so it's like, come on with it. But it's just like, nah, that I don't feel like that was right. Because if something's wrong, I'm just not just take it. Because that's how we get into positions we're in now with fundamental problems.
Repeat the question for me, please.
So, how are you taught to manage difficult emotions such as sadness, fear, shame, and how did it manifest?
All right, so I wasn't allowed to feel. I was raised in a household where, as a boy, you can be mad or sad. And if you're sad, it has to be because somebody died. Any other emotion, when I started the therapy process some years ago, like, I had to remove myself from Chicago because the mindset that they're programming there, even as an adult, I felt myself like constrained and I wasn't growing. So I had to remove myself from Chicago. I had to go to a different environment, and then I started realizing how stifled my emotions were and how emotionally illiterate I had become as a 35-year-old man. And having a daughter, I can only imagine if my emotional stifledness had like went another 10 years, how would that impact her? How does that show her how to love herself? How does that give her a sense of being? And the difference that I'm noticing between raising my son versus my daughter, she asks me, are you mad? Are you sad? And she's 3 and 4 asking me this. My son, he he never asked about how I felt. We never had a conversation about feelings until he was a teenager. And I had gone through therapy, and then I thought one day, like, how did that make you feel? And to hear him break it down, it was like, okay, at least we broke that generational curse, because my dad couldn't feel, his dad couldn't feel, like, and you could trace this all the way back. We weren't allowed to feel. It was anger and sadness had to be tied to death to be acceptable.
So I'm trying to think of my experience. We just didn't talk about emotions. We didn't talk about them. I felt like I was taught to stuff my emotions, to hide them away and just keep moving. And I learned to sort of redirect them into action. So the whole idea of being a human being to me didn't make sense. I'm a human doing. I do to deal with things that are going on inside of me. So I would say that even when I think about sports, which were a big part of my life, I played basketball, went into college playing ball, and had the vision of, all the visions. And with that role, you hurting, you in pain, you got another, we call them deep six, you got to run back and forth, you got to find another gear. You stuff that thing and go, right? So like the whole idea for me, and it worked really well in school. I transitioned that, use that in school. I don't worry about if I'm tired or whatever, just forget all that. Just go, do your work. And now as an adult, oh shoot, that brother is a workaholic like crazy. People in here who know me. But I had to learn how to sort of transition that, because I never learned how to deal with these inner things. I just stuff it and go. And again, I don't know if it's, hopefully if a father was there could express that. But I don't think even in my mom raising the sons and my grandma, like it just wasn't a thing, and probably from their experience, they didn't have that either.
Yeah, I'll add, I just remember now, when I was younger, I was so angry. When I recall, like in 6th to 7th grade, I got in 12 fights in school.
Wow.
Like in school, 12 fights. And it's like...
Were you the aggressor or were you defending yourself?
Defending myself, but it was like I was aggressively defending myself, right? So it's like, if you say something to me, you don't have to necessarily hit me for me to be defending myself, you know what I mean? So it's like, I was aggressive, I was an aggressive defender. But people saw me and I got, in trouble, but like no one saw me. Like if I see a child that has gotten into 12 fights in school, like that would be an alarm, like what's going on, like let me engage. And no one engaged with me, right? In the household, my mother, she was, and I hate to use this term, but she was what you think like a strong Black woman, right? And because she had to be, she was raised by a single parent. Her mother was on drugs, right? So she was really raised by herself. So she had to get a mentality, or that caused her to have a mentality of like, I gotta get it done, I gotta do it. Emotions have to be put to the side because I have to make a better circumstance for my family. Which in turn, like we got the same thing, right? Like we had to like do it. It's no complaints. We didn't get like growing up, like if you do something well, you know how some parents like clap it up for you. She was like, I don't give kudos for you to do stuff that you're supposed to do. Like you're supposed to be doing it, you're not getting any kudos from me. So like my mentality was just like to do it. If it's difficult, you just gotta get it done. But I was so angry from the absent father in some ways, growing up with a mother that had some levels of trauma. And I didn't have a response, and in a lot of ways I wasn't seen, and it was reflected in some of my outcomes.
What are some things that the people in your life could have done or said to make you feel seen or to engage when you were getting in your 12 fights?
To be honest, and that was just middle school fights, so it's like, it's just like it gets worse, but it's like just a conversation. Like, what's going on with you? Like, how are you? Not even what's going on with you, because that's like the framing of that could seem negative. It's just like, how are you, right? Like, let me build a relationship with you beyond just like what I see on the outside. And because a lot of times, like, we as like young men, like we're deemed as already being like bad, right? Like, and I think for a lot of people, I was deemed as being bad, or I was deemed as being emotional, but not emotional as in like having the full range of emotions, but emotional as being angry. Right, and like once we box people in that angry in my situation, like growing up in like Southeast DC, anger was survival. right? It was like a sword and shield. It was like an armor necessary for combat, and like because you had to survive, right? So instead, like of looking at me without context, like look at me with all the context in which I had to engage with, and then like have a conversation with me.
Treat you like a human being.
Treat me like a human.
How do we teach our boys that vulnerability and masculinity are not opposites? And at what age should that conversation start?
As early as possible, when they can comprehend. Sometimes we think conversations are too heavy for our youth. My son would be fly on the walls for real conversations, and I wasn't even acknowledging his presence, but somehow he was still receiving the information. And he was tagged as being precocious. So like all of his cousins call him granddad, and they're the same age. These are like his peers calling him this, because he'll say something and they'll be like, but that's him receiving that information, as you said, cough, right? So we need to have this dialogue with them even before they can really comprehend what we're telling them, just so it can be programmed and instilled into them, and they don't know anything else other than that. But
The same way a 4-month-old baby is learning language even if they can't communicate.
I personally don't think there should be any age limit on knowledge. Just conversation rules the nation, in my opinion. I would also like to say that the world, this is not a traditional world anymore of like traditional values. It's constantly changing. If you're not knowing in the present, you won't be prepared for the future. And that's just another attribute for us being behind. So just constant conversation of the world and what's happening is how we stay afloat.
But I wondered, should we get back to the traditional values? Because I feel like things have deteriorated.
Subjective. I like traditionalism on a lot of aspects, but some parts of traditionalism is how we don't have conversation as Black men.
That's true.
So it's about what you value and how we can make the world a better place. And we fight in our own homes too much. We don't eat at the table anymore. So it's just like those things, those traditional values of what kept the Black community together. It kept the Black dollar together. The Black dollar doesn't even last 30 seconds anymore in our own communities. So how do we become a producer, not a consumer?
I agree 100%. It's like, what traditions can we keep? What traditions can we leave behind? Like, one I'm thinking about is, like, I remember even back in my day, right, which is not too long ago, but it's like adults could check in with children. Like, for instance, if an adult saw me doing something wrong, it does not have to be my parent. Like, they would like guide me and redirect me. And I think because we understood that there was a community that raised a child. I think in a lot of ways we've lost that mentality, and it has to come back, right? Like, we have to understand that, like, we have to create conditions in which families and guardians, they can trust in the community, because I think that's a part of what was lost, right? It's like, how can I trust that if you're going to be redirecting my child, you're going to do it out of love, right? Like, and it's some principles there, so I'm with that. But I think that's a really pivotal piece in like really building what's a sustainable community look like with that's focused in on love and prioritizing it. So.
Shifting gears a little bit, Kofi mentioned that he was really into sports. Jordan mentioned that he was really into sports. And in my experience as a pediatrician, whenever I ask male patients, regardless of their age, what they want to do when they grow up, 95% of them say some type of athlete. So football and basketball are the most popular. And then I say, okay, well, what if you get hurt or that doesn't work out? And then their second answer is doctor, lawyer, scientist, educator. They don't realize that it is more likely for them to do the second option than it is to do the first option. So I want to know from the panelists, what role did sports play in your childhood or adolescence? Was it a source of validation, like the guy in the film said, like that's when people were celebrating him, that's when people paid attention? Was it an escape route to a better life? So like, were you trying to escape poverty or, you know, your neighborhood, or, you know, how did it affect you?
Sports were everything to me. So I did basketball and ran track, and played ball all through school, but to the point where like, and it became such a core part of my identity. I remember when I got married, I had my basketball shorts under my suit, right? Because at any point, you never know if we're gonna have to play ball. So I still wear double socks, you know, for my ankles. Like some of that is so ingrained into who I am. And I do believe I learned a lot of great skills and teamwork and, you know, courage and all the things. But it hit me when I got to high school. So I played in Little Rock, Arkansas, 5A, the top division, and I played with a guy named Joe Johnson. If anybody knows Joe Johnson, he went to the NBA. He was 6'8", I was 6'2". He was faster than me, he could jump higher than me, he could shoot better than me, and I realized there's levels to this, and I don't think I'm ever gonna be at his level. So it really hit me, and then there was a movie called Hoop Dreams. Y'all remember Hoop Dreams? So, and one of the guys from Arkansas, and I saw like this was just his journey and got that injury, and I was like, maybe this is not for me, but I can still be great at what I do. So for me, it was like, I wanna be a doctor one day and play ball. In timeouts, I'm gonna go and see the patients. I had all these things, right? But for me, honestly, to get at the core of your question, it was an identity thing. It validated me. I started to use it as a validation tool to validate others. Oh, you can't hoop. Who are you? You know, and I started to realize that ain't right. Where is this coming from? And it was coming from this sense of this is what society was doing to me as well. They were treating me with great worth because of what I could do, not because of who I was. And I fed into that. I ate that up, and I said, okay, let me get more of that. And so that's been something that I've had to work through as well. These knee injuries took me out, retired me early, so I've had to learn my worth can come from much more other things.
I would say, so I played football. I played D1 football at Jackson State University. Referencing back to football, my dad said I couldn't play in college. So he said that my sophomore year, so I was proving you wrong.
That was my ambition.
Yeah, I just went off. Cause he said I wasn't good enough. But I don't like somebody telling me I can't do anything.
Does that hurt your feelings?
Oh, that's the number one thing that broke me down in my life. And then the number two, can't feel nowhere. But that was the one thing he said I wasn't good enough. I was like, you pissing on my dream, man.
Yeah.
And so I proved him wrong. And then when I got the offer, I said, you know what you said? You didn't say nothing. So like, I think a big part of football was an escape for me because it's like, I like hitting, like I like contact, and it's like a release. It's like literally like a stress reliever.
So instead of fighting, you just let it out on the field.
Yeah, I wouldn't say like I was trying to reference to fighting. I just like this is like a release. Like I don't have to deal with school. I ain't got to deal with family problems. I can just joke out in the locker room, go hit, and then joke back and go back to reality.
Yeah.
So it was like a 2-hour relief of reality. Some people have vices. That was my vice. That was my fix for the day. And I liked that because it was fun for me. But referencing to the culture, I think what we see in our inner cities and rural areas, the only way we think to make it is through rapping or sports. And that's not true.
Right.
If you look at what's wrong with being the best plumber in your community? I mean, I know it's not as fancy, but like, if you look at the data, AI's taking more jobs that are not that. So like, that's the jobs we need and are more meaningful because we don't have enough of them. There's a shortage of it. And we don't talk enough about like meaningful jobs.
Right.
And AI's not taking that over.
Yeah.
And there's always somebody that needs a car fix. As you know, we always have that person in the hood that does it. But we need a few more though.
Right.
You know, just like a lot of different things of like HVAC people that are really meaningful, who are good, men and women, but they don't get the light shine on them. And it's good money.
Yeah.
Being a welder pays $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
Being a truck driver pays $100,000 a year, and there's a mass shortage of that. You could be your own rapper your own way, but you just gotta provide it in that sense of that stability.
Right.
So.
What are some actionable items we have that we can do to change that belief in our community that entertainment is more attainable than, like, you know, other jobs?
So it's funny because the world exalts those two, right? And then in the hood, a third one is exalted, and that's drug dealing. But ultimately, they're like, one of these three ways is how I can change my lifestyle and live a better lifestyle than what I live today. For me, I didn't see a black engineer until I was in my mid-20s. And I didn't know that the path that I'm on now was even an option. They say doctor and lawyer. I said, okay, cool, I'll be a doctor. They're like, what kind? And this is 10-year-old me, by the way, so I don't know how you put this much pressure on a kid. But I was like, I'll be a brain surgeon. Then they showed me Dr. Ben Carson. I was like, yeah, I want to be like Dr. Ben Carson. That was back then, not now. But I saw brain surgery for the first time and had to leave the room. And I was like, yeah, I don't think I can be Ben Carson. And it's just like, all right, so now who? Like, right, Uncle Ben, right. And so now it's like, okay, now what do I do? And I didn't really have like an option or anything. So to answer your question, we got to expose more options than what's being exalted by the media in the schools. Like, we have to show them the plumber, we have to show them the engineer, and all of the gamut between, because they'll then know, like, oh, that can be another option. They can identify themselves in something else besides the ones that are being promoted to as the most.
And also respect those other jobs. Like,
Exactly.
you don't look down on the plumber because he's a plumber.
Exactly.
You know?
Because even like they were mentioning the disparage amount of black males in education. Well, that's because growing up, we were told how little teachers make. And so we didn't want to aspire to be that. We wanted to aspire to be great. And so we jump over these other things that could have been more prominent in our lives to get to what we think is like big time, so to speak. And no one really hits it big time. Everybody's average at the end of the day.
We're all just human. Yeah.
That's it. That's it.
Did you have something, Coach?
I was gonna say that visibility is key. And I hate to say the cop versus top thing again, but seeing it is key. In my medical school, when I was in medical school way back in the day, 180 students, 3 black men. Okay, we all didn't even graduate together. In my residency class of 120 people, there was 2 black men. There wasn't many that looked like me. My role as a clinician, as a pediatrician, I value. People will come from deep Maryland, Virginia, DC, wherever, because they say, hey, there's a black pediatrician at this clinic.
And he's male, because most pediatricians
Black
are
male
white.
pediatrician, sorry. A black male pediatrician at this clinic. And they want to let their sons be seen by me, and they will bring them from wherever. And so, like, sometimes I know I get in trouble because I'll spend a little extra time in the clinic with one of my patients, and they're like, you need to hurry up. And I'm like, we talking about more than just this knee injury right now. I would be in some of the rooms in my training, and I would see mothers, and I would be in there for a long time, and then all the head docs would get mad at me. And I'm like, y'all don't understand. They're like expressing to me their gratefulness for me being here, and I can't, nobody gets it. You're taking too long. You don't get it. Like, y'all don't understand this experience. So it is an honor and a privilege to do the role and play the role that I've played over the years, and I don't take it for granted, because those little moments, even that 15, and for me sometimes 30 is an hour, it's supposed to be 15. Even that window of time, that small glimpse of time, it means a lot to people.
Yeah. It has a huge impact. You never know what that one encounter what the ripple effect will be down the line. I see patients from ages 0 to 22 years old. And so starting as early as childhood, I hear that black boys are being labeled as violent, or they're being labeled as ADHD. And there's all this code language around it, like, oh, he doesn't focus, I have to repeat myself, like all these things. And I think this makes it easy for
their intelligence or potential to be ignored throughout the rest of their schooling. So if we label them in preschool and they have an IEP that says they're ADHD or that they're aggressive and they need these extra counselors, then we don't have to acknowledge that he's smart. Just like the guy in the video said, like, if I have the perfect testing environment, I have the perfect everything, then I will surprise a lot of people. But the boys get overlooked.
What are those letters?
ADHD is attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. And so I want to ask the panelists, did you guys ever feel underestimated during your time in school, and were you able to overcome it?
So school for me was just like, I was forced to do it. It was easy for me. I was not interested in the information that they were giving me, but I did enjoy learning. But what they were teaching me, it wasn't for me. And I didn't do the college route. I attempted to do it, and it just didn't work out for me. When people ask me what college I went to, I normally tell them YouTube University. Because again, like you said, you can learn anything on YouTube, and I've literally gotten into a career based off of that. So I think school starts at home first. I think we sent our kids out to go get this education in a system that wasn't built for them. It was technically built against them. So I think it's up to us as fathers and as parents in general to instill information in our children at home and not so much depend on the educational system to do everything for us. They can teach them math, they can teach them how to read and letters and all of that stuff, but we have to instill something deeper into them that they're just not gonna get from school.
School for me was always like an outlet, to be honest. So there were times in which I think I was not as like school focused necessarily. But like when I had teachers that started to actually like invest in me and see me, like I remember like even in high school, like there were some classes that I would literally like be on the board teaching, like in math class, like they would like just have me up there because if not, I would be bored and just not pay attention. But like when I had teachers that saw that like I actually understand what's happening, like they would put me on the board and just like teach the class, especially like in pretty like high levels of math as well. So I would say that's what good teachers come along with, but I completely agree. Like the first teachers are the parents and the community. So
just to follow up on that, so you were fighting in middle school and high school, but then somebody still saw that, yes, you are brilliant.
yeah, so the fighting slowed down a little bit in high school. No, it was a. I have some high school friends that are in the crowd, but yes, when I had teachers that actually saw me and saw that I was capable, like it was transformative almost, right? It's like I wanted to be more mindful about how I showed up in the space, but also I knew that they saw me in a certain light, and I didn't want to disappoint them. So and sometimes people. And I'm sure even looking across the stage, and even you, Doc, is there are folks that have seen us even when we didn't see all that we were, and they invested in us, and that is transformative for young folks, especially young Black folks, and for me, especially like a young Black man growing up in the inner city.
I would say like educationally, I did well until I went to grad school. I went to HBCU undergrad, and I went to Harvard for grad school. I feel like Harvard was extremely hard. I feel like education in America for Black people we're left-handed in a right-handed world. And it's just how we think, and if you study the educational system of Africa, it's not essential to Westernization. And we do better within our own. The data shows that regarding producers of doctors, lawyers, it's a higher percentage from an HBCU than a predominantly white institution. I think it's essential if you go to college route, as a Black person in America, I feel like you should feel like the best foundation, in my opinion, is going to HBCU first, because you get the grassroots of yourself, and then it's time to build that house on that land that you've gotten from that. But my experience at Harvard, from going from Jackson, Mississippi to the most elitist institution in the world, there's no path for that. It's just like not real. So to maneuver through that system is kind of impossible because you don't have the foundation. Like the people there their families have gone there. They were groomed for that. I just had a dream and applied. It's just a different type of mindset and system. So I think we do better when we're taught by our own.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick, so I so appreciate the comment on the electrician role and these other services that are out there. And I think having these huge social media campaigns that really push this, or that people can digest and see, the visibility is not just through seeing nowadays by the person in front of them. I think there are a lot of new ways that we can do this and get the word out about these great opportunities. I felt like through my journey in academics, every single step of the way, there has been doubts about who I am, what I'm capable of doing, and oftentimes I think it's simply because of what I look like, who I am, and the rare nature of who I was in the sea of other people that were there. And so I've always found myself trying to push beyond that, and to the point where I feel like I'm working double, triple, quadruple time everybody else, because they're not going to look at me as not being able to make it. They don't know how many hours I'm putting in behind the scenes, but I'm about to show each and every one of them, right? And that in itself can help you with quote unquote external success, but internally there's a battle inside that you have to be able to reconcile with. Your worth cannot be based on what these people are saying on the external. So that is a constant struggle when you're constantly trying to prove other people wrong. You're in these mix. The last thing I'll say is, one of the challenges that I had, I had a lot of challenges with reading growing up, but math came really easy to me. People celebrated me in the math, and that gave me a sense of worth as well, that, I am smart, I can do something. And nobody said anything about my reading, even though I didn't read my first book till 6th grade, which that may be later or earlier to some of you all, but 6th grade is pretty late to me. But the reality was, that wasn't a skill set of mine. And I could have, from there, believed, well, I'm not gonna be worth anything, but I had people in my corner, my mom in particular, supporting me. You're good in this, keep it up. And that kind of language, that positive affirmations, that awareness on those factors, I think are really valuable as well. And being able to hear that time and time again, you can build upon those things. And our boys need to hear that. Yeah. Even if they're not good in this subject or this subject, are they good in anything? Let's build from there, and then we can fill in gaps. And I think that's a really important piece.
So I want to address something. You said your mom is Ghanaian. Is your father American?
No, they're both from Ghana.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you're American. Do you consider yourself American?
I am an American citizen. I was born in another country. Okay. I was born in London. I came here and I became a citizen. So I am American, yes.
Culturally, how do you identify?
I identify with what I need to identify with in important time. Okay. Meaning, I'm from the South. I'm from Arkansas. So if I'm around a lot of Southerners, I'm Southern. If I am around people from West Africa, I didn't grow up in West Africa, but I can connect with the culture. I know the foods, I know the different experiences as well. I'm an immigrant. I can connect with immigrant culture as well. My day-to-day experience is as a black male in this country. That's how people view me. That's how I experience life. But I'm able to adjust in different settings. And I think in academics, I've had to learn how to do that because I've been in circles where I'm not the majority. I gotta figure out how to adjust. I play basketball. Hey, you play ball? Let's connect. I feel like as a black male at that, because people don't want to accept me as who I am, by looking at me, I find myself having to adjust to help other people feel comfortable with who I am.
Like the guy wearing the glasses.
Like the guy wearing the glasses. I tried those glasses too, by the way. In the mall, they got the little see-throughs, and it fit my face too well, but yeah.
So here's where I was going with that. There is this stereotype or perception that African parents expect their children to be either a doctor or a lawyer. Is that true? And if it is, do you have this double-mindedness where you are a black male in America, but then at home you are expected to highly achieve?
I can speak about my experiences, and I can speak about people that I know who grew up in households with parents or a parent who came from a West African or an African background. The opportunity to come to this country is rare. And oftentimes those who are able to make it here are letting go of everything to be able to come here or have gotten a small window of an opportunity. My mom was a nurse. And she came to this country as a nurse, as a single mom, raising myself, my brother, my grandmother, trying to make it, not knowing how we're gonna provide for that next meal because she had that one check, didn't know how to navigate through this system. As a child, she's always invested in us that you can be something. You can keep pushing. You can, look, I'm a nurse, you can be a doctor. And she always would implant that in us. So I will argue that in my household, that was something that was really driven. That was something that she helped me believe that I can do. Didn't have the resources to put me in any special places, but at the end of the day, it was that person in my back who was supporting and believing in me. And when you have that consistently, reliably, it helps to put a battery in your back. So yeah.
So for my older patients, many of the adolescent males and young men that I see, they tell me that they smoke weed daily or several times a day to quote unquote relax or deal with stress. But what they don't recognize is that they are dependent on a substance to escape reality and numb themselves from their environment. And so I'm wondering, do you guys think that part of it is because they are treated in a way that's discordant with how they actually feel and what they actually think? Have you experienced that, and how did you overcome it?
I'll say a few words on that. I think, like, football is advice for me. I feel like smoking marijuana might be advice for others to not deal with the reality. I think a lot of things, like weed, alcoholism, a lot of things are hereditary. We pass down habits to our kids just from when they're a little kid and you're smoking outside and you're watching them. And people pick up on things. You pick up habits because your parents are who you are. I mean, you come from them. So it's just another way of coping mechanism. I would say, yeah, like that's just a way to cope, honestly. I don't feel like it's best for me to say if that's right or wrong, because I don't know what people go through.
Did you feel that you were treated in a way discordant with how you actually thought and what you actually felt?
Say it one more time, please.
Did you feel like you were treated in a way that didn't match up with what you actually thought and how you actually felt? So from the film, the big black guy who says, like, you know, women are clutching their purses. See him and he big teddy bear. So like that mismatch, how did you deal with that? How did you overcome it? Did you experience it?
I don't know. I would say I would just focus on what the outcome of the day or where I'm trying to go, instead of the present moment, because I know this shall pass. I think a lot of times in the culture, we live so in the present. That's why we go so hard on birthdays and baby showers, because it's like, this is our moment now, instead of like thinking possibly of like, what legacy do I want to have when I'm gone? So I think that type of stuff.
So when it comes to like the weed per se, I smoked weed from the time I was 15 into my adulthood. And when I got in therapy, I finally learned and realized and understood why I was drawn to it. I couldn't process what I was feeling. And I couldn't express what I was feeling. And so you have these emotions, you don't understand them, they're like bubbling up inside of you. You don't have an outlet for it, you're not allowed to speak on it, you don't even have the words to form if you could speak on it. It's like, what do you do with all of this energy? And played football when I was young, and that was one way, but then I lost interest in it. And so it's like, what do you then replace that with? And if you don't replace it, like, how do you process it? And ultimately speaking to like the younger generation and asking them like, why do you even smoke? And trying to understand it, they don't know how to process what they're feeling inside, nor do they have an outlet that they can use to get that energy out. And so I don't criticize if that's what they do. I do let them know, like, if you thought you was lazy before, like smoking weed is gonna make you 1,000 times lazier. It can stop you and prevent you from doing things that you want to do, just being lazy, right? Just taking that energy out of you. And so, in speaking with them, it's like, what do you then help them replace it with? And I don't really have that answer, but I do know me talking to them and them feeling heard, it helps them. And letting them know, like, I get it, you got this stuff going on inside of you that you cannot get out. Like, I understand it. But let's not create a future issue by stifling what you feel. Like, experience it, feel it, write it out. It's okay.
So, as a fellow pediatrician, we learned about the brain development, and the thing I gravitated onto early on is that trauma in children can alter the brain permanently for the rest of their lives. Little traumas in children. It's so important, the best that we can, to protect them, the best that we can, but they're exposed, and they're consistently exposed. Everybody deals with stress, but this idea of toxic stress is unrelenting. It's consistent. And oftentimes when you grow up with this stress, you look for ways of coping. And it's really hard to figure out tools to cope. Some of these tools, instead of you having them, they start to have you. And I think that the reality of these tools that start to take over and control us, instead of us controlling them, it's showing us in itself that we've lost full control. And so I think that, I think smoking weed ends up being just one of those tools. And before you know it, it starts to control us versus us controlling it. When we thought all of a sudden, it's not addictive, it's nothing to worry about, but now we're dependent on it. Psychologically dependent, emotionally dependent. It's like this, I feel this sense of relief subconsciously. I don't get it. I don't know why I keep gravitating towards it. I just feel better. And for me, my weed is work. And just doing and going or doing, right? Just doing more stuff. Playing ball, whatever it was. And again, I think you said it, like, we're going through life, we're learning each and every day. It's not over. We got years to continue to do this. So not giving up by any means, still providing a sense of hope, but realizing there's real help that's needed. And sometimes we gotta tap into, therapists, sometimes we gotta tap into a strong social network, but we gotta realize we're a constant change in motion.
That numbness or that escape, it often leads to bad actions. So people commit crimes when they're under the influence. And those bad actions don't necessarily reflect like who the person is, but is often just a symptom of unmanaged or undealt with emotions, like the anger and the sadness and the shame that we talked about before. What were the influences that guided you guys either towards or steered you away from engaging in violence, drug use, and or drug trafficking?
So I'll speak to drug trafficking. My father sold drugs, and he was incarcerated, so in and out of jail, let me say. So that was never an option for me, right? Even in time where it's like I had to as soon as my senior year of high school, I pretty much paid for everything from my senior classes. And it was time even in high school where it's I didn't have necessarily the necessary money for food and things of that nature. But selling drugs was never an option because it's I wanted to be the opposite of what my father was. Using was, that I just honestly definitely when I was in high school, I did. For a long time, I was completely against it. But I think for me, it was recreational. I haven't, and I don't use any drugs, but marijuana was definitely something that I think my friends and I we did recreationally. But selling
it wasn't a daily thing for you guys?
No, it was maybe a homecoming or something like that. We would. Sorry, and some of them are in here, so it's that's why I'm smiling. But yeah, that's what I'll say.
Yeah, so I come from a not good environment. where it was like I was surrounded by it, like drugs, drug dealers, like it was just regular. Like they weren't drug dealers, that's my cousin, right? Like this is my family, this is like what they do. We had a conscience, if you would, but for me, my experience was I went away to college and my parents got evicted from their home my freshman year of college. And I was just like, why y'all paying for this instead of a roof over y'all head? And at that time, it kind of like felt like I needed to figure it out for myself, right? I couldn't do what my parents were saying because they don't even have it figured out for themselves. And so I went to the only place that would take me in, my drug dealing cousin's house, and it's like, all right, here's how we survive. And they taught me survival, and we used that, and thankfully things changed, like our situations changed. We were able to have more opportunity later in life, and we leveraged it to do positive things eventually, because it wasn't an end-all be-all for us, but it was normal everyday life. How do we prevent that? We got to give options. Like, again, I didn't see engineers like me. I saw drug dealers. So I'm gonna go do what the popular or the majority is going to do. And then they my family as well. So it's just like, all right, I'm just hanging out with my cousins.
You trust them.
You trust them, exactly. You trust them. But I think if they got exposed to other options, if I got exposed to other options, then it probably would have changed things.
Probably, I can think of like 4 things. So I would say a strong mom and grandmother in the home. I think that was huge for me. That's one. I would say the sports thing was huge for me. I would say the church was really important for me, my faith growing up. And lastly, I would say, I guess school. Another outlet for me to kind of put my attention into something. I think the combination of those things were important for me. With sports, it was always preached to us that the use of the drugs in particular would not allow us to be great. And like I told you, I was trying to be the best. I was trying to be great. If I drink a soda, it's gonna give me the cramps. So I can't drink sodas, so it was that, and some of the wiring and everything like that. So I think those boundaries were really helpful for me in those seasons of life.
So I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank our panelists. I think I want to give you guys one last opportunity. If there's anything from your experience as a Black man in America or as a Black boy growing up, if you want to share that with the audience, this is an opportunity to do that.
I'll just say, as Black men, often we have this society pretty much teaches us that like we can't like be vulnerable and we can't reach out to like our community. I just want to say I think it's imperative that we actively counteract that, right? And like we reach out to folks that are like-minded. We lean on our support system because it's impossible to do any of this alone, right? No matter what our goals are, no matter what our measurements of success are, just to be a healthy person, a healthy individual, we gotta lean on somebody. So let's actively counteract that as much as possible and lean on good folks.
I would say 2 things. One, extend yourself grace and extend grace to each other. And remembering that our identity cannot come from the things that we do. These things cannot define us. Our identity has to come from outside of us. Remember that. Your worth is not based on what you do.
I would like to just bring up that you mentioned it earlier, this trauma that we navigate. I don't think we speak to it enough. Leaving Chicago and looking back, I realized nothing was wrong with us as individuals. We were all just PTSD victims, and we were being raised by a generation of traumatized people who were raised by a generation of traumatized people that you can go all the way back. They said the Jim Crow studies, they were like, slavery isn't going to impact this generation. It's going to impact the kids of the children of these generations. And that's where we're living in today. And this is why we have this, let's call it a dichotomy, whereas we have the successful Blacks and then we have the poor Blacks. And it's like barely a middle class. And so if we have this information, I think it's self-family community. You heal yourself first, you process, you figure out what's going on with you, you open a conversation up with your family, and then from there, you do as we're doing today, and we have open conversations as a community. But I think trauma and healing and processing through that is important for us as a people.
I would like to say changing one life is changing the world. Black men, we gotta step up. That's just in short. The black women, they doing the thing, but we haven't stepped up to the plate. So it's time for us to step up. Don't diminish anybody, just encourage them to do better. Be big on action. The conversation is good, but what are you doing within what you're saying? As they say, stand on business, you know? So I don't listen when I have conversations with people. I kind of don't listen. I'm like, what is your action? So it's like, what are you doing regarding that? And have a plan for that. And once you do that, you make the whole world a better place. So put those words to action.